We are talking to Painted Lines NBA reporter and Sixers writer Austin Krell. What's going on, Austin?
Not much. Thank you guys for having me tonight. I've been enjoying the show, the entertainment
Well,
as we
thank you.
wait to come on.
Thank you. Thank you. We like to have fun. Too bad we don't have the third option here, the guy that's always bold and we like to pick on, but he's not here today because he lied to us like always. He's got COVID. It seems like he has COVID every single week, Speedy. Am I right or wrong?
That'd be pretty sad if he had it every single week.
See, he has no personality. Austin, I'm trying to help him. I'm trying to wake this kid up. I think he's lost. I mean, who doesn't go under his covers naked? I mean, especially with a beautiful woman. So, anyways.
I will say this. I do tend to, the shirt comes off when I sleep. It has to.
Come on.
That's fine.
So you're telling me, Austin, you're under the covers with your beautiful wife. You're not going under the covers sometimes naked?
Well, if I don't have a wife.
I mean, your girlfriend. I'm sorry, your girlfriend, fiance, whatever.
I think if that was the circumstance, the more layers of clothing would probably come off.
Speedy, you see, you're learning something.
That makes more sense. he has a girlfriend.
Well,
that makes more sense.
He doesn't have he didn't say he had a girlfriend.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
He said if he had a girlfriend, more layers would come off.
Okay, I think you just said you weren't married.
And who wears? And by the way, if you
my bad, Austin. It seemed like it was implied.
And by the way,
you and my mom both remind me. So it's okay.
By the way, Speedy, who wears pajama pants without any underwear? Okay, if you're gonna wear pajama pants, you might as well wear your underwear. I mean, seriously.
Again, sometimes it happens that way.
Sometimes it happens that way. That's great. Anyways, Austin, how are you, man? I mean, obviously, you shouldn't be very happy with the 76ers this year. They haven't really looked good. Before we get into the 76ers, why don't you tell the fans how you became a writer for the 76ers?
It's funny. This is my first year on the in-person beat. Last year was the Zoom beat. That sort of was like a good, a good portal, a good window for anyone who had serious ambitions of covering an NBA team to get into it, because they were letting everybody basically get Zoom access. And I stuck with it and applied for a credential, and here I am. But the whole like sports media, my existence in sports media started when I was a senior in college. And so it kind of just took off from there. I built my reputation myself, I guess I would say, my portfolio myself. So just sort of, it's been something that's really, I guess, defined me and kind of gave me a sense of like purpose.
Well, I'll tell you this: Speedy wasn't defined by his underwear. That's for damn sure. So
that's for damn not sure. Be defined by my underwear.
Yeah, you should be. I mean, seriously, if you're letting your dog, find and sniff other things.
Austin, do not listen to him. He's twisting words.
I'm not twisting anything.
As long as you don't rewear them over and over again without.
It was an accident.
It was an accident.
Don't let him twist my words.
Anyway, so why don't we get into some Philadelphia 76ers, comments and information. We were talking to, obviously, Brett Siegel, NBA analyst, before we had you on. And it's interesting. We got into Ben Simmons. And Ben Simmons, a player that I really liked when coming out of college. I thought he was going to be a great player. I know he obviously not very smart guy in college, but for LSU. But when he came into the NBA, the number one predominant pick, his talents as a big man, a lot of people compared his skills to LeBron James-esque. It really hasn't developed that way. LeBron James actually developed a shot coming into the NBA. This guy hasn't shot more than 3 or 4 3-pointers in 5 years. Is there a reason why you think Ben Simmons hasn't really discovered a shot all these years in the NBA?
I think he's just somebody who grew up in an environment where he was always the most physically dominant person. And he just never really had to challenge himself by taking jump shots. And I think he's someone who, when he sees a challenge, he kind of, he'll say all the right things to face it. But then when it comes to like the spotlight, he'll tend to find a way around facing the challenge. So I do think, he comes into the NBA, his first season and actually playing. They're competitive. They defy a lot of expectations, and I think he makes the case that I was put in a situation where I had to kind of like play to my best immediately, in order for the team to win, because we were exceeding expectations, which is like an interesting thought in theory, but it still doesn't explain how you don't develop a jump shot in 5 years. I still think I've always been one to champion the belief that he's just as a guard, he's so much bigger and faster and more athletic than everybody else, or at least than most other players of his size or of his position, that he shouldn't need a jump shot to be great. And to his credit, 3-time All-Star, worthy of those selections, and worthy of two of them, I'll say. And he's been mostly a very good regular season player. So I mean, the jump shot thing may or may never come. It certainly may or may never come in Philadelphia, that's for sure. But I still think that he's an excellent player, and I've sort of been one of those in the boat of, yeah, he has his shortcomings, but everything else that he does is just so advanced and an elite and unicorn-esque, as they like to say, that it's sort of something that I can live with him not having a great jump shot.
So I think one of the things you mentioned was very interesting, where it doesn't seem like he was like thinking he was always the most physical guy. So he doesn't always seem like he has to put in the extra effort in order to do those little things. And again, one of the things at the beginning of the season was him not showing up to practice, him taking shots at Doc Rivers, and they had a on-court exchange that got pretty heated as well. So is something like that concerning for another team, that maybe you could think, oh, maybe this guy isn't really that coachable or easy to work with, and maybe a contending team could shy away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's somebody who's always been, the gold standard. And so when he comes into a league where his flaws get exposed, it's not easy when you're a young adult who's always been told, like, that you're the best at everything, to sort of come to grips with the fact that I'm not the best at this level. And so I think that coachability is a problem, especially when you're a max player and you have an entourage of people who tell you you're a max player, and you have a lot of positive reinforcement. It doesn't really breed as someone who needs to look inward. So I think that can certainly be a problem. But at the end of the day, I think it kind of depends on the context of like what your goal is as a team that could trade for him. Like, if you're a small market program and you're just trying to get to the playoffs and you don't really care, what your playoff ceiling is, you're just trying to get butts in the seats and sell jerseys and get to the big show. Ben Simmons is certainly a guy that raises your floor.
No, I'm sorry. We were talking to Painted Lines NBA reporter and Sixers writer Austin Krell. So why don't we get to the team? And I was never a Doc Rivers fan. I've watched the game for my whole life. Basketball's, despite the fact that I was a big-time hockey player, basketball was my favorite sport growing up. And I grew up watching Doc Rivers play for the Knicks, and obviously a journeyman. And I just never liked the way he coached. He coached for the Celtics all those years. He won one championship with those great teams. And I think a lot of that defense and the defensive style of game was Tom Thibodeau. It wasn't Doc Rivers. And to me, he's a player's coach to the players that he wants to coach. And then the other players that I've seen over the years that he doesn't like, he throws them under the bus. He really does. Like he's done to Ben Simmons. He did that in Boston. When he was in Boston to a couple of players that it ruined relationships over there, and that's why he got fired. Are you a big Doc Rivers fan? Do you think Doc Rivers is the answer over there in Philadelphia, or do you think his livelihood is not going to last that long over there in Philadelphia?
I think for like the purposes of coaching, like there's simply a lot of caveats to like, his failures with the Sixers so far. Like, how do you grade the guy when he has 30-something million of dollars holding, sitting on the bench because he won't play, he wants to get traded? How do you blame a guy when his starting point guard literally like is physically present but is not adding anything to a playoff series? Like that's a very hard thing for really any coach to overcome. So I think like, there's a degree where you have to sort of give him a pass to some extent for what's happened so far in his tenure in Philly. Were there failures in previous stops? For sure. Orlando, the Clippers. Those are, they always came up short in LA. It's also, notable that there were a bunch of playoff seasons where, he had his one or two best players get injured for an entirety of a postseason. So there are things there that I think sort of change the dynamic, but I think, it's hard to evaluate him as a coach at this point, just because there's so many missing things there. And it isn't like he's always had the ideal of his roster, with, Ben, being terrible last playoffs and then this whole season. But I think in terms of the person, certainly does not give young guys much of a rope, which is a problem because he favors older guys who may not have as much to give as younger guys. He also is definitely one to deflect all criticism and self blame and accountability, which especially in Philly doesn't fly. The fans, I would say, they can sniff out BS pretty well. And I mean, no one's blind. Like you can't just say like, oh well, we didn't have our two best bench players when the other team was down 6 of their best players because of COVID, and you'll still lose the game. Who are you trying to kid there? So I think in terms of like the politician and the person, Doc, has not met my expectations. As a coach, it's kind of hard to evaluate at this point.
So the Sixers are kind of different this year too, in a sense where it was always the mantra was always they have the stars and they don't have the depth. And now it seems like they have the depth and they don't have the stars. Joel Embiid's their lone 20-point-a-game player, and everyone else is in the 18s through 11s, 10s. And you have guys like Seth Curry playing well. Shake Milton is a guy that a lot of fans love.
Harris.
Tobias Harris, who's kind of a little down this year, but is still a good player. Tyrese Maxey's looked
overpaid,
good.
By the way.
So do you think that kind of identity is a good thing for the team in comparison to what they were, obviously with Simmons, and also for the playoffs? Could that be a good thing maybe because the Sixers have had their playoff duds where they haven't gotten past the second round because they've lacked depth?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, like with the playoff thing, because it's just when you're playing the same team in the best of 7 series, it's very different than when you're going from Oklahoma City to Golden State to Brooklyn to Philly, whatever. Like what you have is what you have, right, on your roster, and a lot of their playoff failures have come down to Ben Simmons' inability to be effective in a half-court offense. So I do wonder if they're seeing the same team over and over again for a playoff series, if maybe it elevates their play because they're watching film, they're adjusting. But I do think it's a bit of a swing from like being very top heavy to now having like one superstar level player and then a bunch of like B's and C level players. To Seth Curry's credit, he's certainly elevated his game this year, and he's been one of the best season of his career so far. But in the end, star power wins in the NBA, and they simply don't have enough of it.